All right, everybody, welcome to your very favorite Bronze Age Spider-Man podcast. Here comes the Spider-Cast. I am your co-host, Mike-EL, and as always, I'm joined by...
Joshua Murr-VELL. Today we're going to be watching some X-Men related TV shows.
That's right, and we have a returning guest host in the form of G.I.Jolie.
Yes, indeed. Hi.
That's right, and because we're doing X-Men, we decided to call our resident X-Men expert, Brent.
Yay!
I think you guys used to call me back in the day Harvey Brent or Clark Brent. I can't remember what we decided on, but...
I think we used both.
Yeah.
Yeah, you listeners out there, you can vote on what the coolest name is for Brent. Harvey Brent or Clark Brent. We haven't decided yet. So anyway, so this week, as we mentioned, we are going to be comparing the pilot episode of the infamous 90s X-Men series that pretty much the entire world knows about. We're going to be comparing that to one of the very first animated appearances of the X-Men, and this is in the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends cartoon. So just to be clear, this is not their first appearance. They did appear in a couple episodes of one of the 1960s cartoons. It might have been Submariner, I think. And then they have appeared in cameos and 2 or 3 other episodes of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. But this is the first one where they're featured throughout the whole thing. Okay? So I'm going to do my best to summarize the plot for this one. I've actually just been watching the entire series all the way through again on Disney Plus. So a little plug for them there.
Unsponsored.
Right, because they need it.
Yeah, I'm sure. I was going to say, I'm sure they need it. we start off with Spider-Man and his friends, Starfire?
No, Firestar.
Firestar, yeah. Firestar and Iceman, they're in the X Mansion in the Danger Room.
Right.
That's kind of where we start off with this one, and Spider-Man wants to have a go in the Danger Room, and then something goes kind of astray. He uses his spider senses to realize that there's a real missile in there, and it's not just a hologram.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kind of where things take off. Yeah, if you want to take over.
Yeah, and then so basically, so they have all this cool stuff inside the Danger Room. We're introduced to the members of the X-Men, who we'll talk about later because there's some oddities in this lineup that I won't spoil now. But basically, yeah, Spidey's like, well, I'm going to go in on this Danger Room thing, and then he goes in, and things, and it's a lot tougher than he thought it would be. But basically, what happens is they end up, they're being sabotaged by this guy. What is his name again? I was trying to remember.
Siberiad.
Siberiad?
Yes.
Siberiad. And so Siberiad, from what I remember, even though it was a day ago, has taken over. He's controlling the Danger Room, right? Like he's controlling the mansion. So he's kind of trapped.
Yeah, he's in Cerebro.
Right. Yeah, Cerebro. So they've got to figure out a way to defeat him. And adventure ensues from there, and they basically try to make their way to the mansion, right, to defeat this bad guy, who I believe is from the comics. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, and he's targeting the X-Men because he has a history with Firestar.
Right. There's a great scene where sometime in the past, what was were they in a jet or something?
She went on vacation and met he was, what is he, Nathan Price? He's introduced as an engineer.
Right.
She meets him at a resort or during some getaway, and they fall in love.
Right.
And then...
A tale as old as time, really.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Beauty and the Beast.
Well,
truly.
Yeah, so there's this accident that happens while in his lab where half of him catches on fire, and he blames it on her.
Oh, nice.
And that's why he wants his revenge. And it's like this character kind of has the like robot side versus the human side, that like Jekyll and Hyde thing going on. So he's struggling with that the entire time, kind of in the background. Yeah, this episode, this whole show, I feel like, is the Marvel team up of Spider-Man TV show.
Before you continue, before you say another disparaging word,
Right.
I've watched every episode except one now. I've rewatched. And
Okay.
I gotta say, some of the animation in this series is actually really good. Some of it is sort of typical of the day, on par with what would have been later G.I. Joe and Transformers of the same sort of time period. Some of the episodes are a little bit better. They're more like anime. And then this episode is an example of one where the animation is not good.
Yeah.
At all. The writing is not great. I still have an affection for it. But overall, yes, I was disappointed by the episode. But Josh, you were saying?
Yeah. The story's not great. The animation is rough at times. Like the continuity and just like the weird things that happen. It's not just like the movement, but like the background will just disappear randomly, or like there's this one point Kitty Pryde gets thrown into a room and the door opens one way when she's walking in, and then when she's standing there it's the opposite way, and then like every shot it's flipping back and forth. It's like there's just no like like continuity or like like thought put into it some of the times. I mean, even when the cables get cut on the elevator, Firestar, is holding onto the cables and flying up the elevator shaft. Spider-Man uses his web to grab onto it and start pulling up. The shot of them like of the web grabbing onto the elevator is not there. There's nothing there.
I noticed that.
The elevator's not even there. It's not. They're not pulling anything up. I don't know. It's just, it's very lazy, and it is probably important to point out. This is in the 80s. A lot of these cartoons had very low budgets, and they were kind of pushed out very quickly on a short time frame. So a lot of the animators probably didn't have time to go back and like double check for errors and stuff like that. So it's definitely a product of its time, but it's also something that stuck out to me as an animator.
So, resident X-Men expert Brent, what was your first impression? First of all, have you ever seen Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends?
I have actually not, and I felt terribly ignorant that I didn't even know it existed. And I think that's mostly attributed to my fixation of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. Anything Marvel 90s I loved, but I was maybe barely aware of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and I definitely wasn't aware that the X-Men were in the cartoon. So in that sense, I was surprised. In terms of the cartoon, so you guys talk about continuity errors, and that's something that I certainly picked up on in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. In particular, the episode once you realize Cyberiad is behind the whole hijacking of the Danger Room, and he captures, I think, Kurt at some point. Professor X decides to act like the Scooby-Doo gang and split up and search the mansion. But one really jarring inconsistency is the teams he tells people to split up in and go down different corridors. I don't know if anybody noticed that, but he told... I might be getting it wrong. I should have maybe rewatched it, but he tells Storm, I think, and Kitty, and it might have been Colossus, or no, I think it was Thunderbird, to go one way. But when you cut to Thunderbird's group, it's like Thunderbird, Cyclops, and Storm. It was like completely.
Yeah.
It's just I had to do a double take there. I was like, that's not right, is it? So like you were talking about, Josh. I think the animation was quite. I think they were on maybe a rush schedule, let's say.
Yeah.
G.I.Jolie, what's your impression of this episode? Your first impression?
Well, that would explain why everything after Cyberiad seemed crazy. Like they were just throwing darts at a board to see what, not even to see what would stick. I think at one point a lot of the action was revolving around Nightcrawler of all people. I was just overall it it felt very Marvel Team Up to me. But like not in not that's just so listeners want the history, and maybe Brent too, is Marvel Team Up is notoriously bad for teaming Spider-Man up with like just whoever's around and like just kind of doing a shoddy job of it, that we happen to be noticing every single week. So this is no exception. You get X-Men and you get Spider-Man. And you get the things that you want to see from the X-Men, like the Danger Room and like Kitty Pryde walking through a wall. But that's it. There's nothing there. Like, it's weird to me that he's teamed up with only 2 people who are they, let me, like, correct me if I'm wrong, who are considered X-Men, but like they just hang out, the 3 of them.
I'm not quite so sure Firestar is as well known to be an X-Man, which kind of threw me off.
Yeah.
Firestar was created for this show. They wanted to have the Human Torch, but his rights were tied up in another show, so they just created Firestar to have the fire-ice dynamic there, and they just pretended she was in the X-Men, but she actually was never in the comics until later. But
Great.
That being said, as a character, I think her costume's great. I think her voice, the girl who does her voice, is great, so I love her as a character.
Well, the girl who does her voice, I think, is
someone famous, from
Alison Cord.
Little House on the Prairie or something.
Speaking of voices, it's definitely Frank Welker who does Iceman.
Yes, you're right.
It's unmistakably Fred. So it's funny that you were mentioning the Let's Split Up gang.
Well, I was gonna say, actually, speaking of that. Professor X's voice, I'm sorry, I had to do a deep dive there for a second. It sounds like I almost thought it was an imposter trying to play Professor X. I'm like, is this cartoon layered? Like, is this like some sort of large overarching subplot where this isn't actually Professor X? Because this sounds like an imposter.
Yeah.
Okay, now, before we continue, I just have to point out, when we originally planned this episode, we had actually planned to do a different episode of Spider Friends, and that was A Firestar is Born, which I had watched, and Brent, you watched, right? I did. Jolie or Josh, did you watch that one?
I did not.
No.
Okay, so I actually thought that one was a better episode. Brent, what did you think of that one, just as versus quality versus this one?
Oh, in terms of quality, yeah, for sure. I would say it's definitely miles ahead of this episode. But I think it also had great writing in terms of crafting an origin story for Firestar. I actually think, it still has the 80s, hokey, aspect to it. But I think they did a good job of providing Firestar with some depth and origin, which I didn't know I needed, but I did.
So there you go, Josh. Now you have to watch that episode, okay?
Yeah.
All right. But, okay, so now knowing that, though, one of the most glaring inconsistencies, or whatever you want to call this, about that episode versus this one that I didn't even notice until 3/4 of the way through, this episode doesn't have Wolverine. Did anyone else notice that?
Yeah,
yes.
It was a little weird, especially when they start talking about adamantium too. Specifically in this episode, where like one of the rooms is an adamantium room.
Actually,
adamantium, yeah.
It's made of vibranium.
Oh, vibranium.
Vibranium.
You're right.
Okay.
Right.
But because it's an EM, it made me think of Wolverine anyway. So I was like, oh, wait a second. Was that him out in the hall with Storm? When they're like, there was at one point where they're like, well, I can't do this and I can't do this. And like, and it goes from X-Men to X-Men. And I was like, what kind of camp bullshit is this? But like, it was kind of like Three Stooges funny. But I assumed that it would go to Wolverine, and it never did. And I was like, maybe Wolverine isn't part of the X-Men at this point. But I was pretty sure that he is. I don't know.
Funny story. He is a member of the X-Men in that other suggested episode of Firestar is Born.
Yeah.
So he is. We know he's around somewhere in this, 8107 universe. I think I looked it up, and that's what this was considered to be.
Yeah.
But in this cartoon, he has an Australian accent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And which they also brought back in another version of the X-Men that we'll talk about in another episode. But
Part of the X-Men.
Yeah, you got it. Oh, have you seen that, Brent?
I sure
Has
have.
she seen it?
Okay, I was gonna we're gonna review that at a future date, but let's just briefly. I mean, like I already said, I liked Firestar. I'm assuming everyone else. Brent, you like Firestar? You think she's cool?
I'm positively indifferent, but I don't dislike her.
Okay. So let's just briefly talk about the way that these characters are portrayed, especially versus the animated series that we're going to review next from the 90s.
Sure,
let's just briefly run through these. I thought Cyclops looked great. His voice, to me, was not Cyclops, but I want to make a point. His voice in A Firestar Was Born was ridiculously bad. It was a different actor, and it was terrible. So this was better than that, but I still didn't think this was the real Cyclops. Brent, what did you think?
I agree. The voice in A Firestar Was Born, I apologize for bringing it up so much, but the voice was too much. It was so militant. And I know Cyclops tries to posture of being this, good old, military boy, but it was off-putting.
Right. G.I.Jolie, what'd you think of Cyclops?
Is he Russian?
No, he's American. Cyclops is American.
I don't know. I was just getting like Soviet vibes from him. I don't know. It was not good. Maybe it's like the uber military thing, but
this is a post-McCarthyism cartoon. I mean, you could not be far off. Maybe there's some sort of Red Agent, Red Scare thing going on there, some sort of subtext that we're not privy to.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, like I guess Cyclops was Cyclops was serviceable. Are we going to go through them character by character?
Yeah,
because
we'll just go through them.
That's going to be like the canned answer for all of them.
So all just serviceable? Okay, well,
I think that some of them stuck out to be
MVPs with voices.
Right?
Yeah.
What's that?
Like even Spider-Man didn't sound like Spider-Man to me. Like he
Hold
was
the
like
phone.
radio host Spider-Man.
This is the real Spider-Man, folks. Okay, this is what got me into Spider-Man. So, okay, so let's just quickly, Josh. What do you think of Cyclops?
Cyclops, yeah, he was fine. I feel like he wasn't in it a whole lot. Like the moment that I really remember was him escaping that vibranium room, which I didn't think was possible. Like by whatever. Yeah, that's really the only thing that I remember of Cyclops. He was fine.
Okay, we'll do this quickly. What about Storm? Okay. Storm, I thought she was okay, but not as good as the 90s one. Brent, what did you think of Storm?
Yeah, not as commanding or as goddess-like as one would expect Storm to be. I am not a fan of mediums that whitewash Storm's portrayal. So sorry, Halle Berry, and sorry, this cartoon.
Yeah, that's a good point. She didn't sound African. She didn't sound African-American. She didn't sound anything but white, right?
Yeah, and it's just not accurate. Like, Storm is an African goddess, and you want that to come through.
Right,
right. It's also important to note she was voiced by a white actress.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, G.I.Jolie, what do you think of Storm?
It's actually the same person who voices Firestar.
Oh, see, that's just saving money, right? That's just ridiculous. But anyway.
Yeah.
She looked like Storm. That's about it. Oh, yeah. I can't get that picture out of my mind where they're in the hallway. They're like, well, I can't do it. Cut, like, pan to the next. Like, really? I don't know.
I will say she had my favorite costume, though, out of all the X-Men. I think that's a fabulous look for Storm.
For sure. Yep, I agree. Okay, next is Colossus, who, speaking of Soviets, I don't think the actor was from Russia, that's for sure.
No.
I don't know why they can't, like,
I don't know if the actor's ever heard a Russian accent before.
Right. Like, why can't they just put, like, there's got to be someone in California that can speak Russian to give it a vague Russian accent. Like, come on, right? I always wondered about that.
Who did we talk about first?
Cyclops.
Oh, I thought we were talking about Colossus. Sorry, the C names. Again, I'm corn drunk. Okay,
no.
Cool.
Colossus is from Russia, yes.
Do you know what? Brent said there are no MVPs. He was almost an MVP. At least he was like in there. Do you know what? He was doing what I know him to do, which is be all American and use those laser eyes.
Okay. Yeah.
But like Storm did nothing.
Right.
Kitty Pryde barely walked through a wall.
What about Colossus?
I think we're going somewhere that I would agree with, which is he's never heard the voice actor has never heard a Russian native speaker or a Russian accent in his life. I mean, he must not have, because I don't know where he was drawing any inspiration from. But like, again, cool. Colossus rips a door down. He's just a Hulk.
It was cool to see him rip that door. That was very cool.
Yeah, but like, what else do we ever see him doing but rip doors off of hinges?
He's the strong guy, right? There's got to be a strong guy. There's always a strong guy in every group.
Yeah, Cyclops could do that, though. Maybe.
Well, yeah. You know what's funny? Cyclops is, just so everyone knows, Cyclops' eye beams are not lasers. They are force beams. They don't actually emit heat, or they're just concussive. But
concussive,
anyway.
That's the word, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if they're able to make impact, they can make impact in the way that. Anyway,
yeah, they could.
Now we're just arguing physics of the physics of the X-Men.
Okay, a couple more left. What about Professor X? Brent, what do you think of Professor X?
He is my least valuable player. That voice is so offensive to me, as I already mentioned. I honestly thought it was an imposter, and I'm like, this is going to pay off in a future episode. That's not actually Professor X.
They're going to introduce
how wrong I was.
the Tel Shiar.
Yeah, he wasn't great. G.I. Jolie, what'd you think?
The moment he started speaking, it was like, who is this corn-fed? I guess I'm at a point in history where I assume he's British.
Well, that's the thing. I've read, 1,000 issues of X-Men, and he's not British, but because of Patrick Stewart, people always assume he is. But even
he's from New England.
Yeah, even in the movies, Patrick Stewart. Does he do an American accent?
No.
Kind of. No. So I think they're kind of just vague about it.
No, even if he was from New England, like, he still didn't have an accent that sounded like someone from New England.
Right.
Oh, totally. Yeah, they did not. They did not source that well.
No. Joshua Murr-VELL, what'd you think of Professor X?
It was really really off, oddly deep too. Like I didn't expect Professor X to have like a super deep voice like that. Like, it was weird.
Well, it was probably the guy who does Iceman, just deepening his voice. It's the same three people doing everything, right?
He almost sounded like a Valley Girl. He had like a Valley Girl accent if you go back and listen, like a male version. But he had like that like drawl that like there's something wrong. Like it was very, there was a drawl to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just forced. Okay, now we've got two members. These two members are unique, somewhat unique. They're definitely not in the 90s cartoon, I don't think. First of all, we have Thunderbird. Brent, are you familiar with Thunderbird?
I sure am, and I was very surprised to see him here.
Right.
Back from the dead.
Right. For those who don't know, Thunderbird appeared in Giant Size X-Men #1, and then I believe 2 issues into the regular series, he was dead, right? X-Men 95, I think he died. I mean, it's nice to see a Native American character in there. Again, they probably didn't get a Native American voice actor.
Yeah.
But it was nice to see him. And then didn't he change into like a tiger at one point or some kind of animal?
A bear.
A bear. Right, which he cannot do in the comics. Although it wasn't a bad
idea. Yeah.
Josh, what did you think?
Yeah.
Oh, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know. I'm thinking I'm just tired. At this point, I'm just like, these guys are... I guess they're the X-Men. They got the X logo on. That's kind of how I feel.
They sure do. What about you, G.I. Jolie?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great to see all of the X-Men doing like
X things.
Right.
You know how they never really play to the strengths of the group. It's like, did I read somewhere, am I wrong, that this was sort of supposed to be like a pilot for...
it was kind of a
supposed to
backdoor
be
pilot,
like a test to see if they could do an X-Men cartoon. So I didn't know why. I love Thunderbird, but why was he here? Like, I don't get it. Like,
it is
not every X-Men needs to go on every X trip, you know?
Apparently they were going to do this lineup of the X-Men with the addition of Ms. Marvel as binary, because Carol Danvers changes powers and becomes binary at one point, and then they were going to add Video Man. Which is ridiculous. Because, because like we said, they left out Wolverine, they left out Banshee.
Right.
And Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler, was he in this one?
He was.
Yes.
He was.
Yeah,
okay,
he was.
I'm mixing up this one with the Firestar is Born. But anyway, go ahead, Julie.
But I wanted to point out, too, just while you were saying that, like, we're going to change her name to Lady Lightning.
Yes.
Because they didn't think that people were going to understand that she was Miss Marvel. Because there's a lightning bolt on her boobs.
Well, yeah, I mean...
Really?
Thankfully, animation, the standards have changed. Really quickly, Nightcrawler. I was so glad to see him because this is obviously the classic lineup, so I would like to see him in there. Obviously, his voice wasn't quite right. Josh, what did you think of him?
No, I actually think that maybe Nightcrawler was the best of them all for me. I thought that the voice kind of worked. He himself wasn't really in it a whole lot. What's his name? Two-Face's Robot Two-Face is using a projection of him. Siberiad. He's using a projection of him to trick the rest of the X-Men. So he's in it in a sense, but like Nightcrawler himself is only in it at the beginning briefly. Yeah, I thought he was fun. They really back him into a corner of being the goofy X-Man. Like, they say it a couple of times, like, he's the goofball of the group, huh? And you can really feel that, like, test of it trying to be a show. Like, look at, we got this guy, he's the serious one, and, you know, Nightcrawler, he's the goofball. So, yeah, he was good, though. He was probably the best one of them all.
Brent, what'd you think of Nightcrawler?
Okay, so first thing I think is actually kind of important. This portrayal of Nightcrawler, hear me out, surprisingly feminist. He is the damsel in distress in this episode, and it's Firestar who saves the day. That's kind of cool for 1982, admittedly.
Good point.
How many cartoons can you think of that would, do that? So, yeah, I agree. Nightcrawler was kind of the jokester of the group. One thing, though, that cracked me up was the fact that Thunderbird was able to tell that it was a fake Nightcrawler luring them into the maze of madness because Nightcrawler's teleports didn't smell like brimstone.
That's great.
Actually, I think they got it wrong. They said ozone, I think, right?
Well,
it should be
no.
Brimstone.
They said brimstone. Spider-Man smelled ozone from the real missile.
Oh, okay.
Spider-Man said ozone. When they were talking about Nightcrawler, they did say brimstone.
Okay.
And that is true, T, because he is a tracker. Like, that's one of his superpowers is that he's hyper gifted because he's a tracker.
It's just interesting that they used two atmospheric gases as plot devices in this episode.
Yeah.
Ozone and brimstone. I guess they kind of make sense, though, because, Spider-Man was talking about the ozone and how that's reminiscent of a very dangerous danger room, and all of a sudden, instead of just simulations like level 1, the easy one, but he knew he was on level 7 because the missile smelled like ozone or whatever. So I guess it kind of makes sense and leads into the maze of madness. And you would just think that it would be Spider-Man that senses the brimstone later on to continue that plot device, but instead they switched it from Spider-Man to Thunderbird. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It would have made sense that they would have connected it at all. I mean, even this is why I feel like it feels like Marvel Team Up to me, because sometimes things just happen. Like, I really love the idea that they were able to tell that it wasn't Nightcrawler from the smell, but then later on they run into Nightcrawler again and they're like, oh, it's him. it's really him. I smell the brimstone. And then, bad guy. I see.
Siberiad.
Siberiad goes, haha, I tricked you. This time I made it smell like brimstone. It's just like, okay, all right, I guess. Like, I don't know. It just, it wasn't very clever that he just changed it. Like, I don't know. There were. I feel like there were a lot of moments like that just didn't particularly work and didn't like flow nicely. And I think it's possibly because there's just so much going on in this episode for such a short little thing.
Well, there's still one more episode or character to talk about, and this is one of the most important ones, and that's Kitty Pryde, whom is. I mean, we could talk about Kitty Pryde for the entire episode, but a very influential character in, I guess you could say, children's fiction, because she directly influenced Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She influenced a lot of people that grew up reading X-Men at this time. And I think the other important thing about Kitty Pryde was she was in this episode. She was also in Pride of the X-Men. But by the time we got to the early 90s cartoon, the lineup of the X-Men had changed so drastically that she wasn't even included, and they included Jubilee instead, which I didn't like. So I was a fan of Kitty Pryde in this episode, even though they got her costume all wrong. But Brent, what did you think of Kitty Pryde?
So funny you say that. Kitty Pryde didn't speak until very late in the episode, and the entire time she was there, I thought she was Jean Grey.
Oh, really? Okay.
She had slightly auburn hair, and then when they said Sprite, I was like, oh, it's Kitty. Right. And then, eventually, like, it was well into the episode that she finally used her power. But for the first little bit, I mean, she was only like, in the background, like, who's that lady? Mm-hmm. And for the entire time, I thought it was Jean Grey. And that just some sort of liberties with the continuity where all of a sudden Jean Grey was part of Giant Size X-Men.
Right.
But it was Kitty. And I don't really have much to say about her, though. I agree with your points in terms of her influence and her usually acting as a conduit into the world of the X-Men, and I do love that about Kitty. And you're right, she doesn't show up at all in the 90s cartoon, not even once, which is a shame. But it was nice to see her in a cartoon form, because aside from X-Men Evolution and Pride of the X-Men, I guess, but that's just a pilot, I had never seen Kitty in a cartoon, so that was kind of cool.
Right. G.I. Jolie, what'd you think of Kitty?
There's got to be a whole generation of young Asians who watched that X-Men cartoon from the 90s only and had no idea who Kitty Pryde was. Because I'm like one of them. I had no idea that they had to erase one to include the other. So, like, when they included Kitty Pryde in the films, like the Sony films, I was like, who is this? Where's Jubilee? Well, like, what? Why isn't Jubilee here? Like, she belongs here. Like, this bitch just walks through walls. But, I mean, Jubilee's power is also comparably, lackluster. So, I get Jubilee's character. I mean, Kitty Pryde. She's not, my favorite. I understand what she does in the universe. But, in this episode, once the Three Stooges panning ends, it ends with her, and she's like, well, I'll just walk through the wall. And it's like, oh, perfect. There. That's when I knew it was her too. And it kind of threw me off when they called her Sprite. I don't know much about the character, so that I didn't know. Yeah. And it's just like, oh, great. There was a circumstance for everybody's power, and she serviced that need.
Josh?
I think, again, she was fine. I think that the problem here is that we know the X-Men. We know these characters. So just seeing them on the screen, we can kind of recognize who they are, and we can get their personalities. But I feel like this episode doesn't do a great job of informing an audience who wouldn't know who the X-Men are, who these people are. And I think that's why I am just so on the characterization of a lot of these characters, because I liked seeing them, but that's because I already know them. If I hadn't, then I don't know if I would have the same reaction.
That's a good point. Maybe that's why this backdoor pilot didn't go anywhere, right? Because this version
Right.
of the X-Men that they did wasn't really a success.
Mhm.
Now,
I think-
also want. Go ahead.
I know it's Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends. Like I know it's a Spider-Man show, and that's what brings people in. But if they were to have just dropped Spider-Man and maybe even like a couple of the other X-Men and just focused it on like a small group of them going on this adventure, they could really develop their powers and their characterizations and maybe pull people in a little bit more. But it felt like just too many cooks in the kitchen. Everybody had to have their moment, and it didn't really work. And I think that's another reason why it felt kind of thrown together and like not so coherent, is because they had to give everybody their moment, but they didn't really care if it was important to the story or not. They just threw it in.
That's a good point. And I also want to say one more thing to defend this series, and something I didn't really realize until, because I've been watching the behind the scenes stuff for the Batman animated series, and I always knew about studios and I knew about the animation teams, but I kind of didn't realize, like, when they would do shows like this, they would write it, storyboard it, and then they would send it out to different studios. Like one episode would be by one episode would be by another. And so, you talked about how someone mentioned, well, they probably didn't have time to go back and fix the animation or whatever. Not only that, the guy that did the animation wasn't even in the same room. He might have been in a different country, right?
Yep.
So I think this episode is an example of they probably gave it to a studio that just wasn't as good as maybe the other ones that they were used to. And who knows what the original storyboards look like, but this animation was definitely not great. That's for sure. I will agree with that. But there are episodes of the show that have excellent animation, and they have, like we said, some of the same voice actors as Transformers and G.I. Joe and Scooby-Doo. So a lot of the same sound effects, a lot of the same music. So that's partly why I like the show so much, because it fits in with all those other classics from the 80s.
Right.
So
I think
go ahead.
Another thing to note about the animation and storyboarding, usually with storyboards, the like character moments, there's not a lot of drawings. They'll kind of just have like the one drawing and then maybe go to like a slightly different pose. Where with the action, they'll do a lot of posing in the storyboarding to really convey what's happening. And I think that's why a lot of the action sequences in this episode worked better than when a character is just talking to another one. Because there were definitely moments where there's some like fun stuff happening, but whenever the characters stop to have a conversation, I'm completely just done and lost. There's no emotion behind the eyes. They're like, wall-eyed characters just like talking into nothingness. And I think going off of what you were saying, that's probably the translation of the boards to animation. And if it wasn't the regular team working on this episode, that could definitely be the reason why this doesn't work a lot of the times animation-wise.
Interesting. So I'll just say that this was definitely not a great episode, but obviously I recommend the show because I've watched every episode, I grew up with it, and I love it. Brent, would you recommend this series to anyone?
Oh, absolutely. I do think there's merit in it. As much as I've made fun of it today, I think it's certainly, like I said earlier, a product of the early 80s, and that shows. But that was also a different time for comics. So I think it accurately represents the era, and maybe slightly before the era in which it, was trying to represent. I think it's great, giving us more of a lighter cartoon, maybe the lower stakes. Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends. It's not exactly save the world stakes a lot of the time, but absolutely, I'd recommend this for sure.
Awesome. G.I.Jolie, would you recommend this series?
No. I would only recommend it for like true diehards, people who are coming in and enjoying Spider-Man, say, who maybe were only exposed to Into the Spider-Verse. If you think that you love Spider-Man, or if you think that you're going to love Spider-Man, sure. But you can, if you only have lukewarm feelings like me about Spider-Man, you can do without. Unless you have to quench some curiosity, but like my curiosity is sated. I'm good.
I think for me, even if somebody was interested in watching more Spider-Man, I wouldn't introduce them to this first. Like I would probably recommend the 90s Spider-Man before this one, and then if they are a Spider-Man fan, I think that they would absolutely love this series. I haven't seen too many episodes of this. The two I think we watched this one, obviously, and then there's the first one with Green Goblin, and they're at a dance at the school.
Right. Gold.
Right? That one also wasn't super great. But there is a lot of like 80s charm there, and I think it works. Like it's the same quality as like the Transformers or G.I. Joe series, I would say. And I think that if you watched it growing up, you're going to love revisiting it, and it's going to have a lot of nostalgia there. Even if you grew up reading the 80s comics, I think you would also have a lot of fun watching the show.
That's right. I agree with that. Now, we are going to jump to the 90s X-Men cartoon. So in between this and the 90s X-Men cartoon, there was Pride of the X-Men, which we will talk about in a future episode. But for now, let's talk about the 90s X-Men cartoon that everybody listening to this, I'm sure, knows about. And Josh, can you quickly summarize the episode, Night of the Sentinels, the pilot episode of the show? Sure.
So we start off with one of the most iconic theme songs of any TV shows, I think, ever. It's amazing. So then we cut to Jubilee, I believe we start off with. Yeah, Jubilee. And then she's talking to her foster parents, and they kind of have a dispute, and they're talking about how she's a mutant, and there's kind of this, like, you know, distrust for mutants. She runs off, and she's at the mall, and this Sentinel starts tracking her down, and then it's Storm and
Rogue.
Rogue? Is that who it was? Right. Okay. Yeah. Rogue. They help her kind of escape, and then the rest of the X-Men start showing up as well. Gambit's there. He's like flirting with somebody in the store, and then eventually joins in, and you know they help her out. They bring her back to the X-Men after they defeat the Sentinel, and I think Wolverine ends up actually coming in and slicing off his head. And then, yeah, they bring her back to the X Mansion. She learns about Xavier and, you know, the school for gifted youngsters. And then at the end of the episode, she is being interrogated by somebody in the that program. What's it called?
The Registration Act.
Oh,
yeah. Oh. So
in Detroit, Michigan, no less.
Right. And a very accurate depiction, I would say. Yeah, that's pretty much where we leave off. The X-Men need to go save her after that. So that's part 1 of the series. I don't know, did you guys watch part 1 and part 2?
No, I just watched part 1.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I started watching part 2 and I was like, yeah, no.
I gotta say quickly, my opinion might be the odd man out, because when this came out, I was already 15 years old, and I was a huge X-Men fan, and it came out only about a week after the Batman animated series had started.
Oh.
And that was so good, and I swear to God, I thought then, and I've always thought that this show is terrible. So going back and rewatching it, I still think the animation's terrible. But I was slightly... The writing was slightly better than I remember, only in that I think they managed to get the appeal of the X-Men right, especially with starting it with Jubilee and having it take place in a shopping mall. I think as an adaptation, it actually was better than the Bryan Singer movies in that regard. But I'll leave my review at that for now. And Brent, I want to know what you think of this episode. I'm sure you love it, right?
Well, I mean, I love virtually all of the episodes of the 90s cartoon. I love it. I love the sense of us versus them that's instilled and interwoven through a lot of the themes in the episodes. And for a children's cartoon, to able to pull that off and still have this menacing vibe of discrimination, which the older I got and the more I rewatched the show, the more it hit home for me as a minority. But also just it's incredible that they were able to pack in loaded dialogue in a 20-minute episode and make it come off as a serious threat. You know, humans or other mutants, or they deal with some heavy topics in the series. So I really appreciated that. It's, you know, as colorful as it is being a 90s cartoon, they definitely made it a lot less light and fuzzy than Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. There's a considerable tonal shift there, which I identified with. And I know for a fact Bryan Singer also loved the X-Men 90s cartoon for that exact reason, because it did such a great job of portraying prejudice and discrimination. So in that, I mean, I love it. I love the 90s cartoon. Not to say, though, that it's perfect. I do agree, Mike, that there is some embarrassing animation gaffes, and the more that you watch the series, you'd think surely they figured it out by season 2 or season 3, and no, there's constant changes in Wolverine and Gambit's costumes, going from blue to pink and yellow to blue for Wolverine. Constantly. You'd think they'd figure it out after the first 2 seasons, but no. But I do think, though, that the 90s cartoon also does a fantastic job of giving the X-Men a dynamic in terms of how they talk to each other and how they treat each other. You instantly know where Wolverine stands with Cyclops, where Gambit stands with the rest of the team.
Yeah.
They do an amazing job of getting those interpersonal dynamics down pat in a cartoon. So I have nothing but mostly positive things to say about the 90s cartoon.
G.I. Jolie, what'd you think?
I too grew up with this cartoon. I was 8 when it came out, and not having the ability to watch that Batman cartoon, I think the way that this was delivered to me was like in the morning on like CTV or something, like in reruns. And I didn't have the ability to watch Batman. Like I didn't know that Batman cartoon didn't exist to me until like years later, when teenage boys tried to make me watch it. So, and they're like, "Whoa, what were you doing in the 90s?" I was like, "Well, living in the country without cable." So, to me, this had the same effect. Again, a different kind of minority from Brent, but like it spoke to me. This is the first time I saw somebody who was representative of me, and it may have been a cartoon, but it spoke to me. And she was an outsider in a different way, like, and she was navigating that, and it was really cool. Even though her power was kind of like not the greatest, and she wasn't the most powerful X-Men, like. I like the cartoon, though I will echo that it is, in rewatching it in my adult life, it is terrible. The quality and how it didn't hold up. Like, fun fact, like I didn't know this, and you were saying about the animation, how it was inconsistent. It's because it was outsourced to a South Korean studio, and the reason why there's so many there's so many Canadians on the docket is because they did the voice acting here in Toronto. Not here, but in Toronto.
Right.
So they did the voices here, and like Fox was in the US, and it was a mess. She was a mess. So you know what? The themes hold up.
Right.
If someone
maybe arguably even more relevant today than ever.
Yeah. For sure. Could it be better written? Absolutely. Better animated? Yeah. I mean, I could animate this better than it was animated. And I'm not an animator. Like, Josh could definitely animate this better, for instance. Anyway, that's it. I mean, yeah. It's still, the themes, the characters, they still resonate with me. This cartoon, however, is just, it's not what I remember. It's like when I go back and watch Gargoyles. It's not what I remembered.
Yeah.
Joshua
I just recently
Murr-VELL.
did that too. Yeah. I think that for me, the show and the story and the themes for sure hold up. The animation, not so much. It's pretty much what I remember, because I have recently already revisited this show, so I wasn't so thrown off by the animation, but it's not good. It's not great. I will say though, I think that in contrast to the last episode we just talked about, there are some really great moments where we get to know each of the characters, where we don't have to stop. We don't have to stop the show and be like, Colossus. This is Colossus' character. He rips open doors. Like when there's a character moment, even if it's small, like with Gambit, we get to know him when we're first introduced in the mall, and he's flirting with this store clerk. Right? And there's like commotion going on, and he's distracted by this girl. You automatically know like what his whole deal is, and then when he still shows up and saves the day, like they don't have to like stop the action to like have Gambit show off like, look I got some card tricks, and like it's less on the nose. And again, the themes I think really hold up. I watched this also as reruns in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like I was watching this probably like 2001, 2002. And this was, definitely an important show, especially as like somebody who would be like more of an outcast. And, I feel like everybody feels that way when they're younger and can really relate to these characters, and I think that again the themes hold up super well.
Well, I do have to agree. I think the writing was slightly better than I remembered, and for that I would definitely want to go on. I might go on and rewatch this show. But before we go any further, and we don't have to go through every character, but I want to briefly talk about these costume designs because, as I mentioned, this series was launched right after the X-Men Volume 2 #1 came out, which was kind of, I guess you could say, Jim Lee's redesign of the X-Men. It was initially written by Chris Claremont, but he ended up quitting because of conflicts with Jim Lee that the editor sided with Jim Lee about. And so Chris Claremont, after writing for 17 years, decided to quit. So this is really the Jim Lee era X-Men. And I just want to briefly go through these characters quickly. Jean Grey, I think her costume is horrendous. But Brent, I want to know what you think of this version of Jean Grey's costume.
Oh, yeah. I don't think Jean's been blessed with many great costumes throughout her tenure. It does, I mean, we're just talking this episode alone. I agree with you. I'm not a fan of her 90s costume. It looks like she's wearing a giant blue V. And then she just looks naked. Like she looks like, Lady Gaga on that thing.
Right.
But I will concede when the Phoenix Saga comes around and they bring in that iconic look, it's a great look for her.
Yeah,
but in this episode, terrible.
Right, I agree with that. G.I. Jolie, what'd you think of her outfit?
Oh, again, yeah, she looks like a Norwegian pop star. So,
Yeah, pretty rough.
Yeah, like weird, strange hair. Like, I can't tell what is in service of trying to hide their identity and what is in service of like just trying to look like a cool superhero costume. So like, who designs these things? Who designs these things? I don't know, but this was horrible. It was like. It was terrifying to look at.
Yeah.
None of it made sense. You wouldn't want to fight in that. You certainly don't want to walk around the world in that. Like, right. What is this? Anyway, it was garbage.
And Josh, what do you think of Jean Grey's outfit?
Yeah, it's like the hair is what I think really messes it up. Like, it's slicked back in the top, and then it's like a ponytail, but the ponytail I think is below the mask. Right? So, like, she's got that, like, half mask that doesn't cover her hair. Right. But the ponytail, I think, sticks out the other end of the mask. Instead of just being, like, that classic, like, Jean Grey, like, loose, like, flowing. I feel like that, even that would fix it a whole lot. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, it's not great.
She's a glorious redhead, and they're just caging that beast. Like, what is wrong with you people? It looks like she's going to participate in a street fight.
The X-Men do not have a good track record with these head coverings because Gambit has the same problem. He has long hair down almost to his butt, but for some reason when he wears the head covering, his hair is spiky in the front and it looks like a a short updo, and it makes no sense logistically how his hair can go from up to down. There's something just not working out there with that head covering.
Well, also that's also designed by Jim Lee, I should point out. But yeah, let's talk about Gambit briefly. That outfit, I mean, that's the same as the comic book, but I mean, he's got the trench coat, which is pure 80s, 90s. He's got the hair. He's got the pointless mask that doesn't cover his face. He's also got the pink and blue body armor thing. What do you think of the rest of his outfit, Brent?
So I personally really like this iteration of Gambit. And I think there's a nice touch with this outfit in particular as it relates to his place in the X-Men. You will not find an X symbol on Gambit's outfit, which I think is really representative, not so much in this episode, but as his role and his dynamic within the team. He is the outcast amongst the X-Men. And so I always thought that was interesting that he didn't have any X representation on his uniform, which kind of gave to his whole mysterious side. Like, whose side is he on? Is he an X-Man? Is he just that scoundrel thief, deep down in his heart? So I like this version of Gambit both aesthetically and for the implications of the outfit.
Interesting. Okay. Jolie, what'd you think of Gambit's outfit?
That's fine. Do you know what? It looks a lot like streetwear to me, which is, it's in, but the armor is weird. And it doesn't really, I guess it makes sense because his power isn't like, he can't like, there's nothing to protect him. But there's just so many like different things that make him look like a vagrant. Like, they may as well have just torn the arms or the sleeves off of his trench coat and just left the fray. His hair is very, like, I don't know what it is about everything in the 90s, but all dudes had hair like that's just weird, like spiky mop in cartoons. And the balaclava that's covering his head but not his ears, like, but also not the top of his head, which is strange. It's like a scar. It's like a balaclava with holes in it. I don't know. I don't hate it.
And it weirdly like sticks to his face, and it's got like that classic Gambit like cutout on like the cheekbone.
Right.
Yeah, I never really understood the whole mask, like half mask thing for Gambit, but I will say I think the rest of the costume for me is completely iconic. Like, this is exactly what I think of when I think Gambit. So for me, it completely works in this. He completely works for me in this this series.
Right. Yeah, he's fine. So now let's talk about Cyclops, because Jim Lee's redesign of Cyclops is still, it's based on the original version of Cyclops that we just saw in Spider Friends, except he's added on these little straps around his gloves, and he's given him a strap on his chest, and now this is considered iconic, but objectively I don't think it's bad. I just don't know if it kind of goes along with everything else Jim Lee does, which is just adding extra stuff to the costumes that they don't really need. But Brent, what do you think of this version of Cyclops?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I feel like as much as I'm privy and favorable of the 90s version of the X-Men, I do think this costume isn't actually Cyclops' best look. I don't hate it. I don't dislike it. But I'm much more partial, I think, to his design in the 70s and the 80s. So this one, it is a bit jarring. It's a bit much. I get that it's also an iconic look, but I'm not, when I think Cyclops, I think covered head Cyclops from the 70s and the 80s. That's kind of my preferential Cyclops.
I personally like his hair showing, but that's just me. But G.I. Jolie, what do you think of this costume design for Cyclops?
It's the one that I'm familiar with, so I just assume though that every time I see a yellow belt that there's like shark repellent in it, or like flash bombs, or like that they're a utility, because he doesn't have a lot of pockets anywhere on that skin tight suit. But like, he never pulls anything out of them. They kind of look like seat belts. I don't know.
Good point.
To me, it's always looked like he's been wearing one suspender.
Right.
Like the belt doesn't work, so he's just like, well, I guess I'll wear the belt like this.
Yeah,
it's just weird. Yeah, and it makes like a weird Y. I don't know.
It's like a
it's
K-pop
definitely not
harness.
my favorite, but yeah.
You're right. It's like if they would have just given him one more, it would have been an X, right? One more strap, but whatever.
Maybe they thought that was too on the nose.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were care that. Yeah, maybe. Okay, we got a couple more to go. Jubilee, the ugliest costume possibly in history. Brent, what do you think of it?
I agree. Who's gonna wear a neon yellow trench coat and those duck shoes, or those combat boots, whatever she's wearing? Jubilee's costume is not for me, and also not practical for infield battle. Not that she participates much in this episode, but later on.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty rough. G.I. Jolie, what do you think of this outfit?
Oh God, everyone looks like they're going to a rave.
Right.
But like one of those like subterranean raves in like 1981. I don't know about this one. It's not good. Do you know what though? The later version of it is better, but it's not much better.
What did they change? I don't remember.
They like changed the whole thing, I think.
Okay.
Don't they give her a bob cut in the last 10 episodes?
Yeah, like in the graduation episode, it's the only time you see her costume change, and they get rid of the jacket. Because the jacket is, honestly, it's like even more impractical than a cape.
Right.
But I will say that it's the closest to IRL that you're going to get. So when you go to adapt, when you go to adapt this into a movie, it's the one that looks the least silly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
When it's made live action.
Right.
Because like a yellow trench coat exists in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about like the kitchen gloves, but
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But the jean shorts, like, I have jean shorts.
Josh, what do you think?
Okay, so for me, I kind of like it. I agree with the yellow like kitchen gloves. Those are weird, but it gives me like April O'Neil vibes, and like being that character that like pulls you into the story and being the audience. I think that she's the one that's supposed to not be an X-Men. So not giving her a costume and just being a civilian in jean shorts and like a 80s trench coat and just being that like everyman, I think it completely works. And it kind of feels like she's not yet an X-Men, and I think that carries on throughout the entire series, where she's more of a student and not 100% a part of the team because she hasn't learned everything yet. I think later on, once she is more a part of a team, it would have helped to maybe like change it up and give her like a real costume. But just as like an outfit goes, I think it works, and it really feels 80s to me.
So we briefly talked about, because Storm's costume in Spider Friends was actually not that much different from this one, and this is kind of, it's the same costume Jim Lee designed in the comics, except in the comics it was black, in the cartoon it's white. But Brent, what do you think of Storm's costume here?
I think Storm takes the cake for best costume in both versions of the show we're watching. This is another iconic look for her. I can just, when I see her in this episode, I think of her on that first cover of Jim Lee, flying. It's that, 3-piece cover that you put side by side, and I just instantly am drawn back to that image. I love it. It's regal. It's white. It when you see her in the team lineup, you know she's that badass weather witch. Mm-hmm. So I think it does a good job of being an extension of her goddess personality. Totally. So I'm on board with this version of Storm.
Nice. Jolie, what do you think?
Oh, I'm into it. I'm super into it. This is like, anytime I saw a pile of like those Marvel trading cards at like a flea market, this is the costume I would dig out of those piles. Like, this is the card. Because it was like, she's black, she's badass. Look at that freaking costume flying through the air. Like, her hair was the best thing. Like, just white. Crazy white. Matches her eyes. And then, like, these weird wings that, like, I guess she uses to glide on, what, air pockets? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But anyway, like, weather helps her fly. Cool. Do you know what's really strange? I don't like the black costume. I like the silvery white costume. There's just something about it that's, I guess it's just more costumey. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Josh, what do you think?
Yeah, it definitely makes her stand out and, like, makes her pop in the lineup. I think the only thing I don't like about the costume is the double X's. Like, everybody else has, like, the one X as, like, a badge, and she's got two, one on each boob. And it's always just kind of stood out to be like, did we need to put two of them there? Okay. Mm-hmm. But, yeah.
Yep, Jim Lee. Okay, so let's jump to Rogue. Rogue had a slightly different costume before this, but before Jim Lee redesigned it. I always liked the little jacket, but not my favorite version of Rogue, but I still love the character. And by the way, her voice in this show is perfect. But Brent, what do you think of this version of Rogue?
I agree. I love the little bomber jacket number that she puts on. I love the short gloves. They're not as dramatic as Jubilee's, but you know, at least Rogues serve a functional purpose. So I like that they draw attention to that. The voice is iconic. And fun fact, actually, about the lady who voiced Rogue, she is the member of provincial parliament in a small Nova Scotia town of my childhood neighbor, who now lives in Nova Scotia.
Really?
Wow.
Rogue is in politics, baby.
Wow. So she's not a Southern belle.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So she's in the Truro township, or just one over. I can't remember exactly.
Oh, wow.
But amazing. And yeah, you hit, like, the voice hits the nail on the head. Like, you know, as soon as she goes after that Sentinel and she makes a few comments about Storm lightening up, you know, in terms of her weather talk, you know, this is that sassy Southern belle. Rogue's my favorite character.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, she was always my favorite too. Like, I had a crush on her as a kid for sure. G.I.Jolie, go ahead.
Like, if anyone is gonna call anybody sweetheart or honey or, like, just any term of endearment, it's her. She gets to do it because it sounds like butter. And she, like, honestly, she was, like, my favorite growing up. I didn't know what her power actually was until those horrid X-Men movies came out. But, like,
right.
She flew around and she was boss, and like, she hung out with Gambit, which was cool because, you know, he was a weirdo. But I in terms of her costume, though, again, I just don't get what it is with, like, the whole, like, biker gang thing. Or, like, the need to throw a jacket on it to make it look edgier. But I always loved the hair. The hair was the thing, and that's the one thing that really kind of, like, unnecessarily, unreasonably irks me when I see cosplayers cosplay her, is when they get the hair wrong. It, like, makes me angry. But anyway, just putting it out there.
Josh, what do you think of Rogue?
Yeah, she's super iconic, again, with the hair. Like, you know automatically who she is. I like the costume. It doesn't really, I think, matter what costume she is wearing. You automatically know who she is, and I think that's fantastic. It really makes her stand out. I like the, like, weird, like, cut off bomber jacket. I think it's because it almost, like, humanizes them a little bit more. They feel less of, like, costume superheroes, and you can tell that they're everyday people. And I also love that they're in the mall in regular clothes. They're not in their costumes.
Yeah, right,
like, if this was Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends, I can guarantee you Storm would have been walking around the mall with a cape on.
Right,
you know what I mean? Like, it just,
yeah,
I don't know. It just, they seem normal. Like, she's got, like, I think the lightning bolt earrings and everything on. Like, Rogue's got this, like, purple blouse with, like, a necklace. Like, they just look like normal people. Mm-hmm. So I think that those, like, little touches, like the bomber jacket, make them more human.
I agree. I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Some people complain about jackets, but you're right. I mean, it definitely makes them a little bit more human than just walking around in, like, leotards, basically, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it gets kind of cold in the upper atmosphere. You gotta stay warm when you're a flyer.
Right. Okay,
can we just talk about...
Oh,
Sorry, can we just talk about
Brent.
the fact, too, that Storm used lightning to turn herself from civilian clothes into her costume? Are we just going to let that one slide? Or, like, I didn't know any... What?
You're not.
Artistic license, right? They were going for a Spider Friends thing, just like how Firestar just... Woo-choo! Same deal, right? Good fun. Whatever.
Did she zap her clothes off? Did she have the uniform on underneath? Like, is there an explanation?
They were playing fast and free in the early days of the X-Men cartoon, I guess, eh? They just didn't care as much. Yeah. Okay, a few more to go. This design does not translate, I don't think, at all. I think Beast looks like an idiot. I'm sorry, but that shade of blue does not work, and I can't stand his freaking hair, especially because it's the exact same as Wolverine's. Brent, what do you think of this version of Beast?
There's just nothing to it, really.
Right.
Like, it's just a sumo thong, right? That's basically what it is. So, yeah, it's underwhelming. It's unremarkable. Yeah, I don't have much to say about it. It's not my favorite look for Beast.
Right. G.I.Jolie, what do you think?
I mean, it would make more sense if he was completely naked. He's just covered in fur, isn't he, usually?
Yeah, I mean, this is the Beast. He always does look like this, but it's like they made him look worse. It's like the same but worse. You know what I mean?
He looks like this,
I'm trying to find
better, normally.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. Okay, do you know what? Yeah, they didn't really make him look fuzzy. They just, like, messed up his hair / made his hair look weird. And also just, it's like skin. Everywhere is like skin.
Right,
I thought he was fuzzy.
Right, it's not fur. It's supposed to be fur, right?
Yeah, I would prefer a furry Beast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But they gave him a hairstyle that's, like, kind of discernible, but in a very, like, professorly kind of way, I guess.
Great voice, though. Great voice.
Yeah.
Just, I can't stand his look. Josh, what do you think of the Beast?
Yeah, I've never been a fan of, like, the Dracula hair for Beast. Like,
right,
in the animated series or in the comics. I really like Beast as a character, but his design never really did anything for me either way. So, yeah, it's the Beast. It works. It works.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the most important character in the show, and that's Morph. Okay? That's the rest of the show.
Who?
No, actually, we don't even have to talk about Morph, actually. We can skip him. Let's go directly to Wolverine. I grew up reading X-Men, okay? And from 1981-ish to 1991-ish, everybody knew Wolverine had his new brown and orange frickin' costume, and everybody knew that his old yellow and black costume was ugly. And then right when Chris Claremont quit the X-Men, what did Jim Lee do? He put Wolverine back in the yellow and black costume, and so that's what they used for the cartoon. So now that's what everyone associates Wolverine with. I have a personal vendetta against this costume. Brent, what do you think of this costume that technically is Wolverine's original look?
I don't know if I have as strong of feelings about it as you do, clearly.
Okay.
I do like the brown and orange one, though, that he is also very well known to be in.
Right.
I do like that look. This one I think is also iconic, though, and maybe that's just a product of my age.
Sure.
I know they were going to try it in the movie. I think there's a deleted scene in the Wolverine from 2013 where they had the mask.
Right.
And I was like, oh, are they going to do it? But then, of course, the Fox movies wimped out.
Yeah.
But I like it, but I do prefer the brown and orange costume.
Thank you. G.I.Jolie, what do you think of this yellow and black costume or yellow and blue costume?
I think everything in the 90s suffered from, like, the Spawn effect, which was like that eye shape. Everything had that weird swoopy shape. It's like it was in everything that everybody was drawing, and it was like, bleh. and that's what that looks like to me. Those things, whatever the hell those are, they're on the side of his head. I don't get it.
Okay, the mask, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
he
Cat ears.
Yeah.
he always had them, but they made them look bigger here.
Yeah, do you know what? Both costumes are super ugly. It honestly, like, doesn't matter to me. I've never been a fan of Wolverine's costume. I've been a fan of Wolverine, like, he's pretty cool, but like, I didn't like the way he looked, like, in a costume until I saw, like, the Grant Morrison stuff, and I was like, wait a second, who is this? Like, it. Like, to me, when I think of people who still maintain that comic books are a joke and that they're for children, to me, this is one of the reasons why. Is that, like, it's camp in a bad way.
Right. It looks like Adam West Batman.
Well, but that's the thing, is that you can argue that Adam West Batman is good camp because it has a place inside, like, pop culture history, and it's not as ridiculous as the shit that's, like, sliding off the side of his head. Like, there's nothing practical about that mask. There is also nothing practical about the shoulder pads. That they even exist on a leotard is, like, kind of ridiculous. It doesn't look like a dance outfit. It doesn't look like a gymnast outfit. It doesn't look like anything.
Yeah.
And the boots are stupid too. But, like, not to mention the color scheme. The color scheme for both is terrible. The shape and utility for both are terrible. Like, I just don't get Wolverine's costume. It never in my mind jived with his power until I saw him in the leather jacket.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Josh, what do you think of this version of Wolverine?
It does feel classic. It's never been my favorite. I do really like the mask, though. I really love the pointy ears, and I think that
yeah, me too.
It does feel very iconic for Wolverine, and I think what I really like about it too is that his hair weirdly matches it, like it's spiky just like the ears. So that way when he takes the mask off, he's completely recognizable still. I just feel like I kind of like that idea, and I don't know, I've never really been a big fan of any underwear on the outside costumes. Like, I don't think, like, even Superman, like, I know it's very iconic, this might be blasphemy to say, but, like, I'm just like, I don't like the underwear very much. So I don't think it works for Wolverine either.
It is funny when people make fun of Superman for having his underwear on the outside, and I'm like, you mean like Wolverine and Cyclops and Hawkman and every member of the X-Men? Like, but anyway, I want to quickly point out when Grant Morrison redesigned his costume in the 2000s, he said Wolverine, well, in a Scottish accent, but I won't do it. He said Wolverine does not need a hat shaped like his hair on his head. That's what he cooked. But anyway, I'm a big fan of his costume. But anyway, we don't need to talk about Morph. Professor X was cool. He's got the iconic voice, right? I'm sure everyone likes the voice, right? Mm-hmm. Professor X's voice. So we won't talk about that. But yeah. Like, I mean, I actually didn't realize how popular the show was until I got older, and I realized how many people, especially in the generation right below me, kind of grew up with this, and this was their introduction to the X-Men. I just kind of didn't realize that till I got older. So I am definitely intrigued enough that I might go back and rewatch this. Brent, I know you're always rewatching this show, right? So you definitely recommend this episode, right?
I perpetually watch it from beginning to end, and then I get to the end, and then I start rewatching it again. Would I recommend this? Yeah, absolutely. I love this version of the X-Men for the myriad of reasons I stated before. I love it. I love the dynamics. The voices are so 90s, but also so accurate. Nothing but positive things to say about the 90s X-Men cartoon. And this episode in particular is a great introduction to this family of X-Men and how they operate. So I'm into it.
Quick question. Have you seen X-Men Evolution?
I've seen it once through, but I've only watched the entire thing once, so not nearly as well versed in it. I just know I can only think of like the lineup off the top of my head, but I do like X-Men Evolution, but I prefer the 90s.
Oof, okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Is that the one that's like very like high school?
Yes, they're literally
Yeah,
in
okay.
high school. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's my
okay.
favorite version of the X-Men ever. Anyway, G.I. Jolie, do you recommend this episode, this series?
Yeah. If we're going to compare the two, the last show that we watched and then this, I would hands down recommend this show over, like, even for people who are like just jumping into X-Men. I'd be like, well, you could watch that if you're into cartoons. If you can stomach a cartoon, try that 90s one. That one's cute. That's like a good primer. And then I would slowly walk them back to like the old stuff, because that's how I went on my X-Men journey. So that's the only journey I can recommend. Yeah, I would recommend it. Brent watches this. I didn't know this, but Brent watches this the way that I watch Buffy from 1 to 7 every year, which is like insane. That's good to know.
That's the way I am with
absolutely.
the Transformers cartoon, beginning to end as often as I can.
Really?
Yep. Joshua Murr-VELL, do you recommend this series?
For sure. When I think of the X-Men, this is what I think of, is this show. I watched the show before I started reading comics, growing up in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like this was my go-to for X-Men. This is also like I hear these voices when I read the comics as well. So like this show for me really informs who and what the X-Men are. So I would for sure recommend this show.
And also, I should point out, as we're recording this episode, it's actually the 20th anniversary of the release of the first X-Men film by Bryan Singer, which I'd like to revisit in a future episode of the show. So maybe we'll slot that in. We're definitely going to talk about Pride of the X-Men. So Brent, you're definitely welcome to join us for that episode if you're interested.
Anytime you want to talk X-Men, you just let me know. Anything. Animated series, movies, I'll tell it to you straight.
All
we
right.
just need like an X-cast.
What's that?
Maybe we just need like an X-Men podcast. I feel like there's too much to do one episode here and there.
That's a conversation for another time. But if you are interested, we do a new episode of Here Comes the Spider-Cast every week, as well as Flea Market Fantasy every week. And Josh, you can take it from here.
All right, we want to thank you guys for listening to the podcast. It really helps when you leave a review over on iTunes or drop us a tweet on Twitter. You can reach us at HCT Spidercast or at Comic Syndicate on Twitter, and you can find us at the Comic Book Syndicate pretty much anywhere else. We'd love it if you guys would keep in touch. We want to keep that conversation going.
All right, and we'd like to thank G.I. Jolie for coming back again, and we'd like to thank Harvey Brent for joining us. And Harvey Brent will be back in a future episode. So until next Monday, this has been Here Comes the Spider-Cast.
All right, see you then.